Hello, and welcome to today's webinar, Opera in San Francisco. My name's Desiree Littman, and I'm the Program and Marketing Assistant here at Times Journeys. During the next hour, you'll learn about the Opera Tour to San Francisco, where you'll enjoy performances from one of the world's best opera companies and take in the exciting culture of the city by the Bay. We'll also hear from Fred Plotkin, an opera expert and the accompanying time-selected expert on our tour. Before I introduce him, why travel with the New York Times? First of all, each of our departures, you'll be accompanied by a New York Times journalist or subject matter specialist. We offer over 55 itineraries, including land-based tours limited to 26 guests, and specialty cruises on world-renowned cruise lines. We'll visit diverse destinations that tell a story and explore topics such as history, culture, and politics. Each of our trips offers exclusive access so you can escape the crowds and enjoy access normally closed to the public. On this tour, you'll enjoy highlights such as exploring the acclaimed Ferry Plaza Farmers Market and taking a cooking class with a James Beard award-winning chef. You'll attend outstanding performances, such as Mozart's Don Giovanni, conducted by Mark Minkowski, Romeo and Juliet by Berlioz, conducted by Michael Tilson Thomas, Verdi's Rigoletto, conducted by Nicola Luisotti, and Puccini's La Bohème, conducted by Carlos Montenegro. You'll also have the incredible opportunity to meet with Matthew Shilvak, the General Director of the San Francisco Opera, who will meet with our group to talk about the company and opera. I'd now like to introduce you to Fred Plotkin, who is one of the world's leading opera experts with more than 40 years of experience in the opera industry. He's worked in some of the world's great opera companies and theaters, including the Metropolitan Opera and directing at La Scala. He's written numerous books and articles on opera and classical music, and he's been interviewed on multiple occasions by the New York Times. He was named a Cavaliere of the Republic of Italy in 2015, which is the equivalent of knighthood. I'm delighted to introduce Fred, not only as the presenter of today's webinar, but also as the time-selected expert who joins our tour. Welcome, Fred, and thank you for being here today.
Thank you, Desiree. It's a pleasure to be with you and everyone listening. I know that many of you have traveled with me before or studied opera with me, and some book came out recently that said that everyone in their lifetime has to go to an opera with Fred Plotkin. I didn't write the book. I don't know the author. It was published by National Geographic Books. But if you read it, you'll find that it's supposed to be so. So if you've never traveled with me, I'm looking forward to welcoming you on this trip. And if you have, it'll be wonderful to see you again. So let's talk about the trip. We will be staying at a lovely hotel, the Taj Compton Place in San Francisco. If you know San Francisco, you know it's a city with hills and valleys and cable cars and spectacular scenery. And the Taj Compton Place is right in the middle. And it is a very luxurious hotel. It has a superb restaurant. It recently got a second Michelin star. And so therefore, on our first night, when we arrive, wherever you're arriving from, be it from the United States or Canada or South America or Europe, Australia, Asia, you'll be able to settle into a comfortable bed and just go right downstairs to the restaurant. And then when you get a little jet lagged or sleepy, go right back to your room and have a beautiful first night's sleep. Now, opera in San Francisco has a very long history. For those of you not familiar with California history, San Francisco is a very old city. It was for a very long time the biggest city, the most cosmopolitan city on the West Coast. It was the New York of the West, so to speak. And therefore, it has a long tradition of the greatest performers traveling all the way across the American continent to reach San Francisco to do a season. So they would take the Transcontinental Railroad, they would stop en route in places like Denver to perform, but the goal was San Francisco. And many of the greatest opera singers in the world 100 to 125 years ago, such as Enrico Caruso, were already appearing in San Francisco. The Metropolitan Opera would go on tour more than 100 years ago by getting on a train, traveling all the way west to appear in San Francisco. The San Francisco Opera itself was born in 1923, and they built their opera house in 1932. So important is opera to San Francisco that they built the opera house right across the street from the city hall of San Francisco. Culture in San Francisco gets pride of place the way it does in few American cities. So right there you have the wonderful San Francisco Ballet, the San Francisco Symphony, all kinds of arts right around the city hall in this arts district that is anchored by the Opera House. And we're going to be hearing 4 classic works while we're there. One of them is Giuseppe Verdi's Rigoletto. And when I wrote my book, Opera 101, I tried to decide what would be the best first work for someone to see if he or she had never been to an opera. And I realized it was Verdi's Rigoletto. It's perfect. It has everything. It has solos, duets, trios, the best quartet in opera. It has amazing choruses, an incredibly powerful story, and music that you know already. So this will be a perfect entree. I've seen Rigoletto probably 100 times. I never get tired of it. And it has a superb cast led by Quinn Kelsey, the great American baritone. You may not know him, but he's sung Rigoletto in Rome, in Zurich. He's one of the top stars, and it'll be a way for you to get to know this great artist. One of my very favorite composers is Hector Berlioz from France, and one of his works is Romeo et Juliet, based on the Shakespeare. He fell in love with a woman named Harriet Smithson, who was an actress who came from Ireland to Paris to play Juliet. And although he didn't speak a word of English, he fell madly in love with her. And as a result of that, wrote Romeo and Juliet as a stage work. And it has a superb cast, including Sasha Cook as Juliet and Nicholas Pan as Romeo. And many of you who know opera know the name of Luca Pizzaroni, and Luca Pizzaroni will be playing the Friar Lawrence. And it will be conducted by the great Michael Tilson Thomas at the San Francisco Symphony. So these are 2 marvelous works, and there are 2 more to come. For many people, Giacomo Puccini is the most popular opera composer of all, and perhaps the most popular opera of all for everyone is La Boheme, The Bohemian Girl. It premiered in Turin in 1896. It immediately became a hit. It is the opera that the Metropolitan Opera has done more than any other work, and it too, whether you've never seen Boheme or you've seen it 25 times, you fall in love with it all over again. And it will have a lovely cast. You need a young cast, and that's what we have here. Erica Grimaldi, an Italian soprano, is Mimi. Arturo Chacon Cruz, a Mexican tenor, is Rodolfo. And Ellie Dean, who's a superb American soprano, plays Musetta. And Puccini's opera is the story of young love. If you know the Broadway musical Rent, that was the basis for Rent, was La Boheme. And then we have the opera that many people consider the greatest opera ever written. It's hard to say that there's only one, but for many people, it's Mozart's Don Giovanni, which is kind of perfect. It is the story of a legendary lover, of the women who are crazy about him or very angry at him. It is a work of such profound musical richness, of philosophy, of asking and posing questions that are timeless questions. Basically, what Hamlet is to the theater, Don Giovanni is to opera. So we will be hearing a performance of Don Giovanni with the great Italian bass Ildebrando d'Arcangelo in the title role, Mark Minkowski conducting, and wonderful sopranos Erin Wall as Donna Anna and Ana Maria Martinez as Donna Elvira. Pardon my coughing. So, when we get to San Francisco, we will check into our hotel, as I mentioned, and we will have a lovely dinner at the Taj. We'll have a welcoming reception before. In addition to me, you'll have a tour manager. This is one of the things I love about Times Journeys, is that there's someone looking after all of your needs, and that I'm there in part to be your pleasure activist, to provide you with the enjoyment, with the enlightenment, to send you to places to dine, to explore that you may not know in San Francisco, even if you've been there many times. So we'll all meet each other. We'll begin our friendships that evening. We'll have a dinner. We'll have a good night's rest. As I mentioned, on the second day, we are going to hear Berlioz's Romeo and Juliet. But before we do that, if you know San Francisco, you know that architecturally, it's one of the most fascinating cities in the world because it's built on many hills. Let's not pretend there have been earthquakes there, so they have to build in a certain way. It has beautiful bridges, magnificent vistas, and the conditions that resulted in the city in terms of architecture are unlike any other. So they have the very famous painted ladies, they're called. They're Victorian painted ladies, these beautiful houses that exist in certain districts. The bridges, the palaces, the skyscrapers, intimate streets. And we will have a very famous architect join us to lead us about San Francisco. And she will give us the insights and the inside knowledge about architecture in San Francisco. Then, you may have heard that San Francisco, for many people, might be the greatest restaurant town in the world. I'm a New Yorker, so occasionally I'll challenge that, but San Francisco for eating is phenomenal. So a big part of this trip will be the exploration of the food culture of San Francisco. And 1 in 3 people in San Francisco is of Chinese origin. So we will go for dim sum at a restaurant called Tan Kiang, not known to people outside of San Francisco. It was Julia Child's favorite Chinese restaurant, and I had the opportunity to go there once, and we had vast platters of food. I got to taste a little of it, and Julia enjoyed it ravenously and with great pleasure, and so I'll be very happy to take you to Tan Kiang to enjoy the food of that restaurant. Then we'll have a brief break. You can rest, you can prepare, and then we go to Romeo and Juliet. Forgive me, I anticipated by a day. So the day before, you'll have time on your own. I turned it around a bit. So today will be the architecture tour. And as you can see, there are the painted ladies in front of you, the skyline behind, the hills, and so on. And in the evening, La Boheme. Now, with La Boheme, you will discover the real beauty that happens in live opera performance. There's a difference between hearing a recording or watching a video or going to a high definition transmission and actually going to the opera performance. And how does that happen? It happens because the live sound that you hear is so distinct from what you hear on electronic transmission. And that in the beautiful acoustics of the San Francisco Opera House will be something that you will discover anew, even if you've loved opera for years. And that is the San Francisco Opera House, as you can see. It's the War Memorial Opera House is the name. It was built in 1932, so during the economic depression, but it was sort of a urban renewal project, an urban works project. And it reflected the optimism that people there had about the fact that the Depression would be gotten through and that opera would be for everyone. and it always has been for everyone in San Francisco, and not only. So during this day, we're going to do something very unusual. Joyce Goldstein is one of the most famous chefs in San Francisco, and it is with great pleasure that I can welcome her. She's won a James Beard Award as a chef. She is a fantastic cookbook writer. She is one of the mothers of what's called California cuisine. Joyce will cook us a meal and demonstrate what she's doing. And we will also have a very famous wine expert in. I can't tell you the name yet, but he's one of the most famous. And he will lead a wine tasting of California wine. And the reason for that is that Don Giovanni, in addition to all of its great music, is an opera about the pleasure of food and wine. So that we will lead into this wonderful experience with food and wine. Before that, you'll have the chance to be out on your own for much of the day. But by the mid-afternoon, we're going to go and join Joyce Goldstein and the wine expert for this experience that you can't have anywhere else. And I'll speak to you about food, wine, and opera in Don Giovanni before we go to the performance. San Francisco is in a particular position in the world, in that north of there you have Napa, you have Sonoma, you have beautiful valleys to the east and the south that produce much of America's and the world's best food. And every Saturday, boats arrive from all of these areas to the ferry terminal market in San Francisco, one of the world's greatest food markets. And we will have a tour of the market and discover the food culture of this part of the world. And I'll be very proud to teach you about it. It is really fascinating and unlike anything else. So therefore, when you go to restaurants in San Francisco and you taste these amazingly fresh ingredients, you discover that they were bought that morning in the market in San Francisco. And many of the greatest chefs in the city gather there. Opera singers go there, executives go there, teachers go there, homeless people go there, everyone goes there. And it's a remarkable San Francisco experience of the learning of, the sharing of food. And then we're going to have lunch nearby at the Waterfront Restaurant. The Waterfront Restaurant has a magnificent view, but it also has great food, including cioppino, the famous San Francisco seafood stew. Then you'll have the afternoon on your own. The hotel is nearby. And in the evening, we go to Rigoletto. And following that, we will have a reception to celebrate our having spent a wonderful week together and to say goodbye until the next time's journey. And then off we go back to where we live. Although you can stay on in San Francisco on your own, you have that option if you prefer to do that.
Thank you, Fred. This is going to be a fantastic and really unique tour, and it's great to hear your insight on the history of San Francisco opera and how important it is to the city. And thank you for giving us a glimpse into all the incredible performances we'll see. I'm sure our listeners are all very excited about everything they'll experience on this trip. So now I'll just go over some of our frequently asked questions. I'll cover these off, and then we'll open it up to any questions you have. You'll notice a panel on the right-hand side of your screen where you can type in your questions afterwards. So we're often asked whether airfare is included, and we found that guests prefer the flexibility to book flights with miles, and so we don't include them. This also allows you to choose which airport you prefer to arrive into. Transfers to the hotel are not included either, so you'll be able to choose your preferred transport. Are the performances on this tour confirmed? Yes, all of them are confirmed, and this ties into the next question about ticket allocations. For the performances, we provide orchestra premium tickets for all of our guest travelers. Lastly, what should you pack? Before your departure, you'll be provided with a detailed packing list from the tour operator, which will ensure you have everything you'll need for this trip. Now I'm just going to see if we have any questions from our viewers. So we have one um, here that's asking, what if I've never been to an opera before? Is this a good tour to go on? Fred, would you like to speak to that?
Absolutely. Actually, I've been thinking about this. When I planned this trip, I had several thoughts in mind. One was that if you've never been to an opera, Don Giovanni, La Boheme, Rigoletto, and Romeo and Juliet are really the perfect operas. It just worked out that way. And so, therefore, with me teaching you, with you going to classics, with you being surrounded by opera lovers, you may not know this about opera lovers. If they know more than you do, they're not contemptuous. They want to share. They're very enthusiastic. And when I've done trips where people come and they say, well, I don't know opera, they're immediately surrounded. They're protected by the other opera lovers on the trip. So that it's a wonderful way to break into opera. If you know opera very well, then you know that these are masterpieces. And you also know that they have wonderful casts. So, absolutely, it's a perfect trip if you've never been.
So we just had another question come in about the food. So if someone has special dietary requests, will they be able to be accommodated?
Absolutely. Um, San Francisco and California in general, they're so motivated about allergies, allergens, and so on. On all these trips that we do, we have many people. I have my own food allergies. So we can always accommodate that. The most important thing, you fill out a form ahead of time where you give us information. And we'd appreciate if you really are very forthcoming so that if there's anything we need to know, we can make arrangements ahead of time. And as I said, you have a tour manager, so she can address things at the time too. But in terms of allergies or preferences, not to worry at all.
Great. So we've had someone else ask about traveling on their own. If someone would love to join but doesn't have a companion to travel with, would they be okay joining by themselves?
Absolutely. I would say that on these trips, we have a 50-50 mix of singles and couples, and sometimes two people who are not a couple but they're friends travel together, and sometimes they share a room, sometimes they get their own rooms. We are very accommodating. As I said, opera people tend to be a lot more open and sophisticated and so on. So everything works. And whoever you are and wherever you're from, you'll be welcomed. It's not the kind of thing that people are off on their own. So not to worry. And you'll have a lot of support from me and the tour manager.
Okay, great. So we've had two questions that come in, I think, tie into to each other. So someone's asking, what other things are there to do in the San Francisco area? And then we have someone asking, saying they've never been to San Francisco, and will they have enough time on their own to explore the city in addition to attending all of the
Sure.
operas?
So I'm sorry to interrupt. So the trip is designed so that you have most of a day on one day and about half a day on another. Where we're staying in San Francisco is very centrally located, so that if, for example, you want to go to the Modern Art Museum that's just been reopened, it's nearby. If you want the wonderful shopping in the Union Square area, that's a 5-minute walk away. If you want to take a cable car and go to Fisherman's Wharf, you cross Union Square, you go up Powell Street, and you take a cable car. Um, there are so many different things to pursue in San Francisco that, frankly, whatever it is that's your interest can be accommodated. And I would recommend you do a bit of research ahead of time. A book that I like very much is The Time Out Guide to San Francisco. But as you plan this trip, we can help you. But the idea is that you pursue your interests. The only thing I would add, though, if you've never been on an opera trip, what a lot of opera people like to do is have a nap in the afternoon, just an hour before going to the opera so that they're fully prepared. You don't have to, but if you'd like to, you can do that. But we're so well located in terms of our hotel, that everything is within 10 or 15 minutes on foot or on taxi.
Okay, great. And we'll just wrap it up with this last question about people on the tour, asking, do you only have American travelers on these types of trips, or can you expect people from all over the world to come to San Francisco?
On the previous trips that we've done, we've had a mix of North American and international. And when I planned this trip, one of my ideas was the following, that if Americans who like opera prefer to stay in the US, it's a perfect trip for them. But for many people who are either just exploring opera or love opera from Asia and Australia, particularly New Zealand also, but in addition, Europe, Africa, South America, wherever, it's a wonderful opportunity to come to the United States, to have an immersion in one of its best cities, to eat sublime food, to enjoy what's typically very lovely weather, and have time on your own. And then, in addition, you can do other things. One of the questions was about what else there is to do. I would also mention that north of the city is the Napa Valley and Sonoma Valley, so that if you're interested in wine, you could take a day trip or part of a day trip to explore the wine country up there and then come back to the city. So, food, wine, opera, architecture, friendship, beauty. It's a perfect trip.
Thank you, Fred, and thank you everybody for your questions. So I'll just go give you a quick recap of the tour. So the trip departs on June 27th in 2017 and is limited to 25 travelers. This is a 6-day tour and it starts at $6,450 with a single supplement of $1,595. If you have any questions or would like to book your spot, please call our call center at 855-698-7979. And you can also visit our website to learn more about the itinerary. I should mention that we've already sold over half the spaces on this tour, so it's definitely a good idea to call early if you'd like to book your spot. And thank you for listening.